Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a big one, King Solomon. You know the name, the wise, the wealthy, the powerful, but here's the question. How much of that incredible story is actually history, and how much is, well, just a great story?
The Bible paints this picture of a king who's just on another level, richer and wiser than anyone on earth. The whole world, it says, wanted to come and hear him speak. But you gotta ask, is that the whole picture? Let's dig in and see what we find.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the big legends that define him. Then we'll put on our detective hats and check out the actual evidence, or lack of it, for his most famous achievements. And finally, we'll try to figure out what it all means.
Okay, let's start with maybe the most famous story of all, the one that really cemented his reputation for being unbelievably wise, that famous judgment. This story is just a masterclass in psychology, isn't it? You have two women, one baby, no witnesses. It's an impossible situation. So what does Solomon do? He comes up with this brilliant and honestly terrifying test. That command to cut the baby in half, it's not a real order. It's a psychological trap. He's looking for an emotional reaction, and he gets it. The true mother's love outs her immediately. It's genius, and it seals his reputation. But is it an original story?
So where did this incredible story actually come from? Well, what's really fascinating is that when scholars dig into it, they find something surprising. It's not a one-of-a-kind tale. Nope, it's actually part of a much bigger storytelling tradition.
In fact, this kind of story is so common that experts have a name for it. They call it Tale Type 926. Think of it like a genre, a folk novella. It's this classic setup you see in cultures all over the world. A wise judge, a tricky case, and a clever psychological test to get to the truth. Here's a great example. Over in India, in the Jataka tales about Buddha's past lives, you find an almost identical plot. This time, a sage tells the two women to have a tug of war with the baby. And just like with Solomon, the real mom can't stand to see her child suffer, so she lets go. The details are different, a tug of war instead of a sword, but the core idea, the emotional test, it's exactly the same. And this pattern, it doesn't stop with his wisdom.
Right, so Solomon isn't just known for being wise, he's known for being powerful. And that power is symbolized by two huge things, his incredible temple and that legendary visit from the Queen of Sheba. If you read the Bible, the description of Solomon's temple is just jaw-dropping. We're talking cedar, gold, enormous stones, the whole 9 yards. It was meant to be the absolute center of religious life, the architectural crown jewel of the entire kingdom.
Okay, so you've got this super detailed description. It's like an architectural blueprint. You'd think archaeologists would find something, right? Well, they've been looking for a very long time.
And the reality is pretty stark. We have found zero, and I mean zero, direct archaeological evidence of Solomon's temple. Now, part of the problem is the location. The Temple Mount is one of the most politically and religiously sensitive spots on the planet, so you can't just go digging there. But this total lack of evidence has made a lot of scholars think, maybe the original temple wasn't quite the massive structure the stories make it out to be. All right, let's switch gears to his most famous international meeting. And just like the story about the baby, this one has really taken on a life of its own, changing and growing as it's told in different parts of the world.
It's fascinating because the story of the Queen of Sheba is completely different depending on where you hear it. In the Bible, it's basically a state visit. In the Quran, it's about her converting to his faith. But then you get to the Ethiopian national epic, the Kebra Nagast, and wow, it's this epic romance where she has Solomon's son, who then founds an entire royal dynasty and, get this, brings the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. The story just keeps getting bigger.
And here's another wrinkle. Historians can't even agree on where Sheba was. Was it in modern-day Yemen? Was it Ethiopia? We don't know for sure. And when you look for hard evidence of a queen ruling from that area in that time period, you find nothing. The records are totally silent. Okay, so we've looked at the stories of his wisdom, his temple, his famous visitor, and seen that the evidence is shaky at best. Which brings us to the biggest question of them all. See, the Bible doesn't just say Solomon was a pretty important local king. It paints him as a global superstar, a household name across the entire known world.
So let's think about that. If he was that famous, wouldn't we expect to see his name pop up somewhere else? In the records of the Egyptians or the Assyrians or any of the other big players on the world stage at the time? The answer? Nothing. Not a single mention of a King Solomon outside of the Bible from that entire period. It's just complete silence.
And listen, this is a huge deal, because we do have evidence for other Israelite kings. Archaeologists have found an inscription that mentions the house of David, his father, and later kings like Ahab show up in Assyrian records. But Solomon, this legendary empire builder, he's a complete ghost in the historical record.
So, what are we supposed to do with this? We have this massive, larger-than-life figure in the Bible and then a total void of evidence in the world around him. It makes you wonder, why were these incredible stories told in the first place?
Well, it's pretty likely the stories of Solomon were never meant to be a literal history textbook. They were written down hundreds of years after he was supposed to have lived. Think about their purpose. Theologically, they showed that God keeps his promises. Politically, they created this ideal golden age for the kingdom, something to look back on and strive for. And as we saw with the Ethiopian story, they were powerful enough to become the founding myths for entire nations, legitimizing rulers for centuries.
So here's the real takeaway. Solomon the legend ended up being way more important than Solomon the man ever could have been. His true legacy isn't in stones and ruins we can't find. It's in the stories themselves, stories that are woven deep into the fabric of some of the world's biggest cultures and religions.
Which leaves us with one last big question. If we can't prove the man existed in the way the stories say, what is it that makes his legend immortal? It really shows you something powerful, doesn't it? Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we believe in, they can be more powerful and more lasting than any historical fact.